It's the moment of madness that can leave someone seriously injured, disabled or dead. A single wild punch thrown in anger, often after too many drinks. The victim falls and hits their head with devastating consequences. It's happening all too often in Australia, and over the next 3 nights we speak to survivors and their families and look at how police and the justice system are dealing with the growing problem.
A fight, a punch, a fall. Heartbreaking consequences. Tom Biviano and his mother Shirley are living that nightmare. A family forever changed.
He was a good man, this one. He's never lived off of welfare. He's supported his kids really well. He was a company man that supported 13 families. And now he has to sit in this darn chair and do nothing. What a waste of a life. What a waste of a life.
And Tom's not the only one. King hit attacks, many of which are unprovoked, are on the rise. 37,000 non-domestic assaults occurred last year in New South Wales alone. 8,500 were serious.
Died as a result of a single blow at the Maitland show. On the blow knocked him backwards, his head hitting the concrete curb.
A 47-year-old man is fighting for his life in hospital after allegedly being king hit.
42-year-old Tom was walking home when he was struck. His injuries left him in a wheelchair with permanent brain damage. Tragically, the father of 3 was trying to be a good Samaritan. It was here in the early hours of October 31, 2009, when Tom tried to stop a fight in Maitland. That's something he now regrets.
People don't try and do it. Just stay away from it. Please. It's totally stopped my life. Totally. Can't believe much has changed.
We recently returned to the scene with Tom and his family.
Well, it's gut-wrenching because that's where all our lives changed.
It was the first time he's been back since it happened.
Tom received a brain injury through the back part of his head was crushed from when he took the fall to the concrete. Massive bleeding, so all his mobility's shot now. It's like a computer that's been smashed and can't be repaired.
Shirley and Tom's stepdad Les are now full-time carers, and he's very aware of the impact on them as well.
They want to do things and they can't. Good look after me.
Tom's life died. We lost a son, and we inherited a new son with a lot of disabilities.
Shirley believes there's too much violence in sport, in movies and online. This video posted on several social media sites reveals just how quickly a verbal exchange can escalate to a so-called king hit. In this case, it's an intoxicated man who'd been provoking a tradesman on Newcastle's Beaumont Street.
Everywhere you look today, it's sort of glorified. The young ones just look at it and they think it's natural to fight.
She hopes Tom's story will bring change, make young men think twice before throwing a punch, emphasising it could mean the difference between life and death.
Well, I hope through this interview that they will see that that one punch will change their life.
Victims of Crime Assistance League Executive Director Robin Cottrell-Jones has supported victims for 18 years.
It's beyond me why people kick and jump on and so forth, but when one punch has been shown so often to cause a fall that cracks a head, that kills a person or maims a person, we have got to somehow or other do the education.
Bo Lawton, the man who punched Tom, was sentenced to 14 months jail for assault occasioning actual bodily harm and will be examining sentencing for these crimes in the 3rd part of the series. But tomorrow night, the king hit. A trauma expert explains how one punch can kill, plus how police are trying to stamp out violence on our streets.
Now to the second part of this week's special NBN news series on Australia's one-punch epidemic. With the party season now in full swing, police are cracking down on violence fuelled by drink and drugs. Tonight, advice from a senior police officer about avoiding trouble, and a trauma expert explains what happens to the brain in a king hit.
It was a senseless death that broke the nation's heart. 18-year-old Thomas Kelly king hit in King's Cross on July 7 this year in another unprovoked attack.
And the last words that both Kathy and I said to him was, please be careful, please take care. And he said, don't worry, I will, and I love you.
His parents hope his tragic death highlights the escalating violence on our streets and the desperate need for it to stop.
Thank you for making our world a safer place to live in. We will never forget you.
Special police operations, including the nationwide Operation Unite, are targeting street fights and alcohol-related violence. The festive season is now well underway, with revellers enjoying Christmas parties and heading out in the warmer weather. But police are advising be aware of the risks if you come across a street brawl or an aggressive partygoer.
My initial advice to anybody being in that situation would be to avoid a confrontation, which sometimes means walking away. But it also is about, not putting yourself in a dangerous position in the beginning.
Alcohol and drug use are major contributing factors. Intoxication frequently making the victim more vulnerable and the perpetrator more aggressive.
Certainly a very, very high percentage of these king hit crimes would be related to alcohol consumption, both by the victim and by the offender.
Jared Lawson, a police officer for 25 years, has experienced the sad outcomes of these crimes. He believes young people have trouble understanding the real impact of their actions.
It's not necessarily the punch, the fist that comes into contact with someone else's body that causes all the damage. It's the actual falling onto a hard surface that can have dire consequences.
Like Tom Viviano, who we met last night, those who do survive a king hit can suffer a lifetime of serious, long-lasting injuries. Trauma expert Dr. Chino Bendinelli says brain injuries from single-punch crimes are becoming increasingly common at the John Hunter Trauma Service in Newcastle. So what happens to the brain when someone is punched and their head connects with the pavement?
In these cases, what happens is that the brain gets shaken, basically, from the punch in the face first. Sometimes one of the pieces of bones that are broken by the punch may well injure a vessel, and you have a bleeding inside the brain. Then you fall down, you hit something hard, and off you go. You have another insult, another injury to the brain.
Dr. Bendinelli says movies and television programs don't help as they don't show the real injuries.
We see a lot of movies in which they get these punches in the face, they stand up and they fight again. That's a movie, and it looks like you punch in the face, you get a blue eye. That's rare. But usually you get a punch in the face, you are injured for life.
Tomorrow night, the final part to this series. We speak to a senior barrister and examine the sentences, including the one handed down to the man who punched Tom Viviano.
You tell me the justice system, did they give me justice today? No. They didn't.
What a joke!
They didn't give my son justice.
What a joke!
Now to the final instalment of our three-part series on single-punch crimes. Tonight we examine whether our legal system is failing us when attackers are not charged with murder for king hits that kill. In Western Australia, a one-punch homicide law is already in place, and some are calling for a similar stance here. Tonight we hear from one of New South Wales's most senior barristers.
It's a topic Terence Healy is passionate about. A barrister for 33 years and police officer before that for 17, he says the alcohol and drug-fuelled aggression and fighting must stop.
I think that education must start in the home about violence. Education must be continued at school, in football clubs.
He says real heroes walk away.
Time is on their side. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, if every young man was to consider in that space it's his space, and how they react can determine the rest of their lives.
Mr. Healy's worked on many cases of single-punch crimes and says as well as the impact on the victim, it's also devastating for the offender and their family.
Many, many mothers have been in my chambers, crying and distressed, together with their husbands, the siblings, the girlfriends and the close friends of the offender. They're all impacted upon.
He represented Jeremy Beasley, a young Newcastle man found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 3 years behind bars.
I think the judge had to be fair to both sides, and I think he achieved that.
32-year-old Greg Newton died after being hit in the head in Newcastle's Beaumont Street in 2009. He was knocked backwards, his head hitting the concrete curb. Beasley delivered the deadly blow. Greg's family believed the sentence wouldn't act as a deterrent to others.
A stiffer sentence might make others that are inclined to violence around our streets more aware of the ramifications of their actions.
It's a reaction echoed outside court by victims' families time and again. Tom Biviano and his family found it very difficult coming to terms with the 14-month jail term handed to Bo Lawton, the man who punched Tom, leaving him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life.
You tell me the justice system, did they give me justice today? No. They didn't.
What a joke!
They didn't give my son justice.
What a joke!
It was handed down on September 24th this year, and given time already served before his sentencing, Bo Lawton will be eligible for parole in April.
It's not enough at all. Not enough at all. Wish I got given a sentence. Even 5 years would be good.
Tom was in court in March last year when Lawton pleaded guilty to recklessly causing grievous bodily harm, jailed for a minimum of 3 years and 9 months. But following a change to the legal definition of recklessness, Lawton later pleaded guilty to a less serious charge of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and his sentence was reduced. The maximum penalty for that crime is 5 years prison. He got 14 months.
What Tom's thinking is, look at what's happened to me, how can it be so trivial? And it will never make sense, because it doesn't make sense.
Robin Cottrell-Jones has supported victims of crime for 18 years.
Victims will always say that the legal system lets them down because it isn't about the effect on the victim, it isn't about the long-term damage, the fact that their lives are utterly over in the way that they were. It's about what the offender can be proved to have been thinking at the time or doing at the time and what they really intended.
She says victims have very few rights and often aren't players in the court system. Robin says community and political action is needed to change that.
I guess the real question is the way the law working now right for today's society?
And what do you think?
No, I don't think it is.
Mr Healy disagrees.
We do in New South Wales a very good job. Our sentencing laws are considered and measured by very experienced judges.
According to the Bureau of Crime Statistics, in 2010, 27,000 people were convicted of assault in New South Wales. 31% were serious assaults causing injury. Of those, 18% received a jail term, averaging 13.3 months. Victims, police, lawyers and trauma experts all agree education for young people is paramount, teaching them about the real-life consequences of violence and that one moment of madness which Tom and his family live with every day.
One punch can change so much. Think before you do it.
Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
You can see Jane's series in full on our website, nbntv.com.au, along with more information and extended interviews. And special thanks to camera operators Grant McIntyre, Rebecca Cuttance and Dion Ambrose, who all worked on that series.